All right, welcome to Agent After Hours. We are here with another episode of What If? And today I have a great question because it's a deal that came up in the last week. What if you have a buyer and seller and the buyer does inspections and doesn't want to move forward based on the new Dayton Cincinnati purchase contract? They just want to send a termination. And the seller says, nope, no thanks. Send me the list of repairs.
That would never happen. All right, so it happens all the time. And so what this triggers is a whole lot of things. First of all, what your clients need to know right out of the gate is earnest money is not the exclusive remedy for a seller. So I have a lot of buyers who, once we have the talk that we're about to have, they say, well, I hear what you're saying, but that's okay. What's the worst that can happen? I lose my earnest money. No, that's not the worst that can happen. You can be sued for multiple damages. So it's really important that your clients follow all of the terms and conditions of the contract. So the terms and conditions of the contract allow for only very limited circumstances on when a buyer can automatically walk. Those circumstances are delineated within the inspection contingency, the last section there. It's matters of structural, toxic waste. It's pretty limited, and that's intentional.
Sure.
The hope is that the buyer who fell in love with this house enough to put an offer on it, thinking that there were no problems, would still be happy with the home or property if those problems that they now know of are in fact fixed.
Right.
Or remedied to a degree that they're happy with. So if not actually repaired, but I'll pay X number of dollars towards your contractor to make the repairs post-closing. So that's the process they've got to walk through. And I know that not all buyers want to do that. They just want to be done. They want to be done, or they want to throw their entire inspection report at the seller and say, okay, do every last thing in here. Keep in mind that the contract expressly states that the entire inspection report is not, in fact, a notice of defect. There's a lot of things in an inspection report, if it's a good inspector, that really aren't defects, but just for the buyer's information and notification. Jiggly doorknobs, loose floorboards.
Battery and a smoke detector.
Minor and routine maintenance and repair. But then there may be several things that are actual repairs. The buyer needs to ask for those. Give the seller the opportunity within the terms of the contract that they agreed to in the first place. Give the seller the opportunity to respond.
What do you do in the stalemate situation, though, where it's like the buyer's like, hey, I'm not sending you anything. I want my earnest money, and the seller is kind of stuck because they can't. I mean, they could obviously sign the release, but the buyer is typically going to ask for their earnest money back. Mm-hmm. The seller can't put their house back on the market.
Well, and when you say not sending you anything, so when you say stalemate, that buyer has asked for repairs.
Nope.
Okay, if the buyer asks for nothing,
just says we want out. Here's the termination.
Under the terms of the contract, the buyer doesn't have, unless it's one of those few exclusionary items, the buyer doesn't have the ability to unilaterally terminate.
Right.
So now the buyer has to be very cognizant that if they're asking to get out of the contract and they roll past their inspection period, not having presented a notice of defects, they're deemed to have accepted the property. They have just extremely disadvantaged their position. Don't let them do that. So they need to present the notice of defects. If at the same time they want to also give a notice of termination and say, hey, we would like out. If you don't want to do these, let's not fiddle around for both of our sake.
And that's ultimately what the seller decided.
Yes.
Hey, let's get this back in the market. Let's get it sold.
Let's get it agreed. But if the buyer does nothing, they're deemed to have accepted the property as is. Don't let your buyers do that, especially because they clearly aren't satisfied with it as is.
Right.
If they send over a request and the seller doesn't respond at all, the seller is deemed to have agreed to make all those repairs or give the corrections as requested. Don't let your seller do that unless that's what they really want to do. So presumably, buyer will be submitting the notice of defect. The seller will come back and say, if not, yes, I'll do all of that, which if they'll do all of that, why a buyer would then be upset, I don't know, but I know what happens.
They found a property down the street that they like more.
And that's a different story. Yeah, and that tends to be what it is, or they've just lost their excitement over it. It happens, but again, if your seller's going to fix everything that's wrong, why would you be upset? It's now going to be newer and better than you even thought it was before you knew that there was a problem. But okay, so seller's not going to do everything in the list. They tell them they're not going to do everything in the list. I'll do 3 things, not 10 things. Now you're at a stalemate, and now the contract will terminate on the face if they don't come to agreement.
Yep.
So, and that's where the parties need to recognize that the risk isn't only in the earnest money. When a seller isn't releasing that earnest money, hopefully the buyer has built that into their financial structure that then they can go on and still purchase another property.
So A, know your timelines. And B, this is from the state of Ohio. Do not tell a buyer that they may be in breach.
That's correct. Please. I'm telling you, they are so strict on what they consider to be the unauthorized practice of law. Your first response isn't, you might be sued, you could be in breach. Though both things might be true, the state of Ohio Division of Real Estate believes that that's the unauthorized practice of a law for a realtor to say that. Not my opinion, but it is theirs, and that's the one that really matters in that case.
Yeah, so tell them to seek legal counsel.
Yes. All right. I hope
Awesome.
that answers it.
Awesome, thank you.